My family was used to giving orders. So, when my sister announced in the group chat, "We're taking your lake house for the summer," a chorus of thumbs up emojis followed. No one asked. I didn't argue. I didn't warn them. I just waited. 6 hours into their drive, my new security system activated, capturing their stunned faces perfectly. I didn't answer their frantic calls. And when the threats to break down the door began, I sent a single text: "Try it." This was never just about a house. This was the payback they never saw coming. My name is Natalie. In the sterile, high-stakes world of a Boston hedge fund, my name is synonymous with precision. I am 34 years old, and I function as a legal analyst, a role that demands a scalpel-like mind and an almost complete detachment from emotion. I dissect contracts, identify loopholes, and quantify risk in billion-dollar deals. My colleagues see me as an efficient, unshakable instrument. My performance reviews describe me as ruthlessly analytical and exceptionally self-sufficient. They are right. I have built my life with the same meticulous attention to detail that I apply to a merger agreement. My independence isn't a statement. It's a fortress. Its walls are the mortgage payments I make on my own 2-bedroom condo in the South End, a minimalist space of clean lines, muted colors, and quiet solitude. Its highest turret, its most sacred keep, is the lake house. The lake house sits on a wooded acre in Vermont, overlooking the glassy, unblinking eye of Lake Champlain. I bought it 3 years ago with a bonus I had worked 80-hour weeks for 18 months to earn. It was an act of pure, selfish preservation. I didn't consult anyone. I didn't ask for opinions. I saw the listing, drove the 3 hours from Boston on a crisp autumn Saturday, and stood on the weathered deck. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the shore. In that moment, I felt a kind of peace I had never known, the profound silence of a place that expected absolutely nothing from me. I made an offer that day. It is the single greatest thing I have ever done for myself. The house is modest, all cedar and glass, but it is mine. Every nail, every pane of glass, every cent of the property tax is a testament to my own labor. It is my sanctuary, the one place on earth where my existence isn't conditional. My family lives in a neighboring state, close enough for obligation, far enough for the illusion of distance. My parents, now easing into their 60s, reside in the same suburban Connecticut house where I grew up. It's a comfortable home, made more so by the checks I send to subsidize their retirement. A quiet transaction that is never acknowledged but always expected. And then there is my sister, Allison. Allison is 31, 3 years my junior, but a lifetime ahead in the only currency my family values: visibility. She is the sun around which our small familial solar system has always revolved, married to a perfectly pleasant, ambitionless man named Ethan. Allison is the vibrant, effervescent center of every gathering. Her life, with its minor dramas, its decorating triumphs, and its endless stream of social engagements, is the unending narrative of our family. I am, at best, a footnote. At worst, I am the silent, stable moon, reflecting her light and providing the gravitational pull of reliability and financial support that keeps her world spinning smoothly. I have spent a lifetime being the forgotten daughter. It's not a malicious act on their part, not a conscious cruelty. It is something far more insidious, a complete and total lack of awareness that I might have a life as rich or a story as compelling as Allison's. It's an ingrained habit, a default setting that has been coded into our family for over 3 decades. I remember my 30th birthday. I had just closed a grueling case, and I mentioned over the phone that I was taking myself out to a Michelin-starred restaurant to celebrate. "Oh, that's nice, honey," my mother said, her voice already distant. "Listen, I have to call you back. Allison's having a complete meltdown because the caterer for her garden party used the wrong shade of hydrangeas." The call ended. She never called back. The hydrangeas, I later learned, became a legendary family anecdote, a hilarious tale of Allison's charming perfectionism. My milestone birthday was never mentioned again. Every holiday, every dinner, follows the same script. I will begin to share a detail about my work, a challenging project, a small victory. We just successfully navigated a hostile takeover bid that, speaking of hostile, my father will interrupt with a chuckle. You should have seen the look on Ethan's face when Allison told him how much she spent at the new boutique downtown. And just like that, the conversation pivots. The spotlight swivels back to its rightful place. I've learned to stop trying. I've learned to offer brief, sanitized updates that can be quickly acknowledged and dismissed. Work is good. Boston is fine. No, still not dating anyone. I am the stable, predictable, and blessedly low-maintenance daughter. My role is to be the audience, the quiet benefactor, the fixed point of reliability they can all depend on and, therefore, ignore. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, I have always maintained a veneer of perfect civility. I send lavish gifts for birthdays and anniversaries, always chosen with care, always received with a casual, distracted thanks. I transfer funds without being asked, anticipating the need before it becomes a crisis. I listen for hours to circular conversations about Allison's friends, Allison's husband, Allison's plans. It has always been easier to comply than to protest. The emotional energy required to demand a sliver of their attention felt like a cost I couldn't afford to pay. It was simpler to write a check, to nod and smile, to fade into the wallpaper. This pattern of self-effacement led to my greatest mistake. Last year, during one of their rare visits to my lake house, a visit, of course, centered around giving Allison a relaxing weekend away, my mother commented on the beauty and isolation of the place. "It's just so peaceful here," she'd sighed. "But what if something happened? A pipe burst, or the power went out while you were in the city? You should have someone nearby who can check on it." The unspoken words hung in the air. We should have access. I was tired. The entire weekend had been an exercise in catering to Allison's whims, and I didn't have the strength for an argument, for the inevitable accusations of being untrusting or selfish. So I did what I always did. I capitulated. From a small dish by the door, I picked up the spare key. It felt unnaturally heavy in my hand. "Here," I said, my voice flat. "This is the spare. For emergencies only." My mother's face lit up with a triumphant, saccharine smile. "Oh, Natalie, you are such a good daughter," she cooed, slipping the key into her purse as if it were a long overdue tribute. "Always thinking of your family." I said nothing. I just watched her. A cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. I knew, even then, that I had not given her a key. I had given her a weapon, and I had a sinking feeling that an emergency would be whatever they decided it was. The air in my parents' house was thick with the scent of lilies and buttercream frosting, a combination that always smelled like Allison's birthday. The party, ostensibly for her 31st, was in full swing. It was the usual cast of characters: our parents, a few aunts and uncles, and a rotating collection of Allison and Ethan's friends who all seemed to share the same vacuous, sun-kissed look. I stood near the French doors leading to the patio, a glass of overpriced Chardonnay in hand, observing the scene like an anthropologist studying a particularly predictable tribe. The social dynamics were as rigid and unchanging as bedrock. Everyone orbited Allison. She was a supernova of manufactured charm, her laughter just a little too loud, her gestures a little too theatrical. My role, as always, was that of the quiet, affluent benefactor. My presence was required. My financial contributions to the party fund were assumed, and my gift was expected to be impressive. This year, I had outdone myself. 2 months prior, during one of our obligatory weekly phone calls, Allison had spent 20 minutes lamenting a lifestyle article she'd read about a bespoke, at-home serum-making machine. It was a ludicrously expensive gadget that combined various active ingredients into personalized skincare. "Can you even imagine?" Nat, she'd sighed dramatically. "Having a perfect serum mixed for you, like, every single day. It's probably $1 million. A girl can dream." I listened. I always listen. It's the one thing I do better than anyone else in my family. I researched the device, found the Swiss company that manufactured it, and paid a small fortune to have one imported. It arrived in a sleek, ridiculously heavy box, which I had gift-wrapped in minimalist silver paper that stood in stark contrast to the mountain of floral and pastel offerings piled on the gift table. When the time came, Allison tore into her presents with the feigned excitement of a game show contestant. When she got to mine, the heavy weight made her pause. "This one's from Natalie," my mother announced, as if presenting a tribute from a visiting dignitary. Allison ripped the paper away, her eyes widening at the logo on the box. "No, way," she breathed, lifting the lid to reveal the gleaming chrome and glass device. "You didn't? Happy birthday." "Allison," I said, my voice even. For a moment, a flicker of genuine surprise and gratitude crossed her face. "Oh my God, Nat. This is the thing, the serum thing, Ethan. Look," she squealed, holding it up for everyone to admire. There was a chorus of oohs and ahs. For about 30 seconds, I was the focus of their attention. I felt the unfamiliar warmth of their collective approval. It was fleeting. "I can't wait to set this up in my bathroom," Allison said, already turning to her best friend. "Can you imagine? It'll look perfect next to the new vanity." And just like that, the moment was over. The gift was absorbed into the larger narrative of her perfect life, and I was once again relegated to the background. The expensive, thoughtful gesture was reduced to a set piece in her domestic tableau. We moved to the dining room, the table groaning under the weight of a catered meal I had quietly paid for. The conversation, predictably, was a monologue of Allison and Ethan's greatest hits. We heard, for the third time, the story of their recent trip to Napa, complete with Ethan's detailed, and frankly boring, review of every Cabernet he had tasted, and the hotel. "You guys," Allison gushed, "the thread count on the sheets must have been, like, 1,000. We're thinking of going back in the fall." "That sounds lovely," I interjected. Seeing a small opening, I was actually thinking of taking a trip myself. The firm is offering a sabbatical program, and I'm considering a month in, a month my mother cut in. Her eyes wide with alarm, but directed at Allison. "Honey, you can't go back to Napa for a whole month. Who would look after the dog?" Allison laughed. "Mom, she means Natalie is taking a sabbatical, not me." "Oh." The interest in my mother's face evaporated instantly. She turned back to Allison. "Well, don't you go getting any ideas about a month-long trip." The conversation moved on, leaving my sentence hanging unfinished in the air. I took a slow sip of wine, the bitterness of the alcohol mingling with a familiar sour taste in my throat. This was the rhythm of my life with them, a constant, gentle, almost imperceptible erasure. Later, as dessert was served, a 7-layer cake with Allison's name scripted in elaborate pink icing, my Aunt Pam turned to me. "So, Natalie, still busy with all that legal business? You must be working so hard." It was the perfunctory question, the conversational bone thrown to the quiet one at the end of the table. "It's been intense, but rewarding." I began, deciding to try one last time. "We're launching a new fund focused on sustainable energy, and I'm heading the compliance team. It's a huge responsibility, but it feels like—" "Speaking of huge," my father boomed, clapping Ethan on the back. "Did you tell them about the promotion?" Son Ethan, who worked in middle management at an insurance company, puffed out his chest. "Well, it's not official yet, but it's looking like I'll be moving up to Senior Regional Director of Claims." The table erupted. Congratulations were offered. Toasts were made to Ethan's monumental achievement of becoming slightly less junior in his inexplicably tedious field. My sustainable energy fund was forgotten, a ghost of a topic that had never really existed. I ate my cake in silence, the sugary sweetness cloying and artificial. It was as we were gathering our things to leave that I made my fatal error. I announced my intentions, believing foolishly that they were mine to announce. It was a lovely party. "Allison," I said, handing her a card that I knew contained a check she wouldn't even register. "I've got to head out. Big week ahead. Then I'm planning on spending most of the summer up at the lake house to decompress." The words had barely left my mouth when I saw it. It wasn't a word or even a sound. It was a look, a silent, charged current that passed between my mother, my father, and Allison. My mother's smile tightened slightly at the corners. My father's jovial expression went blank for a fraction of a second. Allison's eyes met my mother's, and in that fleeting glance was a whole, unspoken conversation. It was a look of confirmation, of a plan being momentarily inconvenienced but not derailed. It was a look that said, "We already have plans for that." It was the look of people who held a spare key and viewed my property not as my sanctuary, but as their asset. "Oh," my mother said, her voice light and airy, but her eyes were like steel. "The whole summer. That's a long time to be up there all by yourself." "Honey, I'm looking forward to the quiet," I replied, my own voice hardening almost involuntarily. Allison stepped forward and gave me a hug, her embrace feeling less like affection and more like a strategic maneuver. "Well, we'll have to talk about that," she whispered, her tone bright and conspiratorial, as if we were planning a surprise, not negotiating the terms of my own life. As I drove back to Boston that night, the city lights smearing across my windshield, I couldn't shake the image of that look. It was the calm, confident expression of people who had never considered my boundaries because, in their minds, none had ever existed. They had already decided. My lake house was theirs for the taking. And my plans, my desires, my entire existence were just minor details to be managed. The notification came 2 weeks later, a single, sharp buzz against the polished surface of my desk. I was deep in the bowels of a complex international trade agreement, the text a dense forest of clauses and subclauses. My focus was absolute. My world narrowed to the words on my screen. The buzz was an unwelcome intrusion. I ignored it. A second buzz followed, then a third, and a cascade of them, a digital hailstorm. With a sigh of irritation, I picked up my phone. The screen was lit up with notifications from the family group chat, ironically named Family Fun. The message at the top was from Allison. It wasn't a question. It was a decree. "Hey everyone. Amazing news. Ethan and I were talking, and we've decided we're going to use Natalie's lake house for the whole summer. We'll be based there from June through August. We want it to be a real family hub. So of course, the whole family is welcome to come and go as you please. Let the summer of fun begin." I read it once, then a second time, the words blurring into an incoherent jumble of arrogance and assumption. "We've decided. Not we were hoping or we'd like to ask. We've decided." As if my home were a public park, a community resource they had graciously elected to manage. Before I could even process the audacity, the responses began to flood in, a tidal wave of gleeful complicity. Aunt Pam. "Oh, how wonderful Mark and I can come up for the last 2 weeks of June. I called dibs on the bedroom with the Lakeview Uncle Jack fantastic idea." "Allie, I'll bring up the new grill. We can have a massive cookout for the 4th of July. My father sent a string of thumbs-up emojis. "My mother, I'm so proud of you for thinking of this. Sweetheart. A real family summer. Just what we needed. I'll bring my good linens." Cousins I hadn't spoken to in months were suddenly chiming in, scheduling their weekends, planning menus, arguing playfully over who got to use the kayak. They were decorating my life without me. They were furnishing my sanctuary with their own expectations, their own desires, their own complete and utter disregard for me. The speed of it was breathtaking. In less than 5 minutes, my summer of quiet solitude had been hijacked and transformed into a 3-month-long, all-access family resort. My fingers felt numb as I typed out a response. I deleted 3 drafts that dripped with the rage coiling in my gut. I forced myself to be level, to be polite, to be the reasonable person I had always been. "That sounds like a fun idea," I wrote, "but I already have plans to be there myself for most of the summer. I told you all at Allison's party." I hit send. The silence that followed was deafening, but it lasted only a few seconds. Then, the assault began. Allison was first. Her reply was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive martyrdom. "I don't understand. Nat, why would you be difficult about this? I'm trying to bring the family together. We never see each other. My own sister doesn't want to see me. My phone immediately buzzed with a private message from her religiously. You're going to embarrass me in front of everyone like this. Before I could even think of how to respond to that, the public barrage resumed. Aunt Pam, Natalie. Don't be selfish. A beautiful place like that is meant to be shared, especially with family. Uncle Jack. Your sister is trying to do a nice thing here. What's the big deal? The house is big enough for everyone. The big deal was that it was my house. The big deal was that I had paid for it with my own money, with years of sacrificed weekends and late nights. The big deal was that my peace was not a commodity to be divided up and distributed among them, but I knew these arguments were useless. To them. My ownership was a mere technicality. Their desires were the only things that were real. My father weighed in, his tone one of weary disappointment, the one he always used when I failed to conform. Natalie, let's not create drama. People are excited. Just work around it. You can have the house some other time. This is for the family. This is for Allison. I thought, the correction sharp and bitter in my mind. I felt a wave of dizziness. My office, my sanctuary of logic and order, suddenly felt claustrophobic. The carefully constructed walls of my life were being breached. I could feel the familiar pressure building in my chest, the old, ingrained instinct to give in, to smooth things over, to sacrifice my own needs for the sake of a quiet life. It was easier to capitulate. It had always been easier. I typed, "It's my house and my decision." My thumb hovered over the send button, but what was the point? It would only lead to more accusations, more manipulation, more of my mother calling me, her voice weeping with disappointment, asking how I could be so cruel to my sister. And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, the final blow came, the message that severed the last, fraying thread of my compliance. It was from my mother. Her words were not directed at me, but at the rest of the group, a public dismissal of my very existence. Everyone, just ignore Natalie. She gets worked up about these things sometimes. Don't change your plans. She'll come around. She always does. I stared at the screen. She'll come around. She always does. There it was, the entire dynamic of my life, summarized in a single, condescending sentence. I wasn't a person to them. I was a problem to be managed, a stubborn child whose tantrum would eventually pass. My objections, my plans, my very selfhood were irrelevant. My only function was to eventually, inevitably, yield. A strange calm washed over me. The frantic, cornered feeling in my chest subsided, replaced by something cold and hard and clear. It was the clarity of a final straw. They had pushed too far. They had miscalculated. They had assumed my silence was weakness. My compliance was contentment. They believed they knew my breaking point. They were wrong. I looked at my mother's message one last time, the glowing words a monument to their collective arrogance. She always does. Not this time. I thought. I put my phone down, turned it face down on the desk. The buzzing continued, a frantic, desperate sound now. But it sounded very, very far away. My focus returned to the contract on my screen, its complex language suddenly simple. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The time for words was over. I did not say another word. The group chat continued its frantic buzzing on my desk, a hive of indignation and entitlement, but I was no longer a part of it. I silenced the notifications, the digital noise fading into an irrelevant hum. My focus was absolute. I finished my analysis of the trade agreement, my mind a clean, cold engine of logic. Every line of text was clear, every potential liability identified. For the first time in a long time, my professional and personal mindsets were in perfect alignment. I was assessing a threat and implementing a mitigation strategy. The next morning, I sent a brief email to my managing director, requesting 3 personal days. I cited a minor property issue requiring my immediate attention. The request was approved within minutes. I packed a small overnight bag, my movements precise and unhurried. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel hurt. I felt a profound and unsettling calm. the kind that comes when a decision has been made so completely that there is no room for doubt. The drive north to Vermont was a quiet pilgrimage. As the concrete and steel of Boston receded in my rearview mirror, replaced by the dense green forests of New England, I felt the layers of obligation and expectation peeling away. I was no longer Natalie, the forgotten daughter, the reliable sister, the silent benefactor. I was simply a woman driving to her property to secure her assets. The language of my profession gave me a strange comfort, a framework for the actions I was about to take. I didn't drive directly to the house. Instead, I stopped in Burlington and went to the offices of a high-end local security firm I had researched on the drive up. The consultant, a crisp man named David, listened to my requirements with a practiced, professional air. I need a complete overhaul of my current system, I stated, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. I want a multi-camera, high-definition setup covering all points of entry, the driveway, and the deck, motion-activated floodlights, a new alarm system, loud enough to be heard by the nearest neighbors. But the most critical component is the monitoring. I want a system that, when triggered, sends an alert directly to me and simultaneously dispatches local law enforcement. No preliminary call from a monitoring center. A direct, automated police dispatch. David raised an eyebrow slightly. That's our premium package. Ms. Hale, it's typically for clients with specific security concerns. My concerns are specific, I said coolly. I also require that all access codes, online portals, and administrative controls are tied exclusively to my phone number and my email address. No secondary users, no guest codes. The installation needs to happen today. He typed something into his computer. We can have a team on site within the hour. Excellent, I said, handing him my credit card. One more thing. I need the name of the best locksmith in the area. The security van followed me down the long gravel driveway to the house. As I stepped out of my car, the familiar scent of pine and lake water filled the air, but this time, it felt different. It felt like a territory I was preparing to defend. While the technicians began their work, installing discrete cameras under the eaves and replacing the old alarm panel, I met the locksmith at the front door. I want every lock replaced, I told him, the front door, the back door, the sliding glass doors to the deck, everything, and I want a high-security brand, something that can't be easily picked or bumped. He nodded, a burly man with competent, calloused hands. No problem at all. For the next 3 hours, my quiet sanctuary was a hive of activity. Drills whirred, wires were run, the old familiar locks were removed, their brass casings looking dull and obsolete as they were dropped into a cardboard box. The locksmith handed me a small, sealed packet. Inside were 2 gleaming silver keys. That's it, he said. Only 2 keys in existence. You're holding them. The weight of those keys in my palm felt significant, a tangible symbol of my reclaimed sovereignty. By late afternoon, the work was done. The technicians were gone. The locksmith had driven away. The house was silent again. The new alarm panel glowed with a small, green, reassuring light by the door. The cameras were nearly invisible, silent sentinels watching over my domain. I walked through the house, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. It was the same house, but it felt fundamentally changed. It was no longer just a property, it was a fortress, and I was its sole commander. I opened one of the new locks with a satisfyingly solid click and stepped out onto the deck. The late afternoon sun was turning the surface of the lake to molten gold. I sank into one of the Adirondack chairs, the same one I had sat in 3 years ago when I decided to buy the place. The profound, unbroken silence of the Vermont woods settled around me. There were no demands here, no expectations, no passive-aggressive text messages. There was only the gentle lapping of the water, the whisper of the wind in the trees, and the steady, rhythmic beat of my own heart. A lifetime of being accommodating, of making myself smaller to fit into the spaces they allowed for me, had ended. My mother's words echoed in my mind. She'll come around. She always does. A small, cold smile touched my lips. They had built their entire world on that single, flawed assumption. They had mistaken my patience for permission, my generosity for weakness. They had never considered that the person who quietly paid their bills and solved their problems was also ruthlessly analytical and exceptionally self-sufficient. They had never imagined that I would apply the same dispassionate logic I used to protect a billion-dollar fund to protect myself. For the first time, I felt the true meaning of power. It wasn't about yelling or arguing or making demands. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you had drawn a line that no one could cross. It was the silent, steady hum of a security system waiting for a command. It was holding the only two keys in the world that could open your door. The next day, I drove back to Boston. I walked into my quiet condo and placed one silver key in a secure drawer. The other I attached to my own keychain. I turned my phone back on. There were dozens of missed calls and angry pleading, manipulative texts. I read none of them. I deleted them all. I did not text the group chat. I did not call my mother. I went back to work. My focus sharper than ever. I had fortified the perimeter. I had set the trap. Now, all I had to do was wait. The first Saturday of June arrived with the kind of bright, optimistic sunshine that promises new beginnings. For my family, it promised the beginning of their commandeered summer vacation. For me, it promised the beginning of the end. I was sitting in my condo, the morning light streaming through the large windows, a steaming mug of black coffee in my hand, when my phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, buzzed with a single, arrogant message. It was Allison, in the family fun chat. "It's here, Lake House Day 1. Ethan and I are packing up the car now. Should be on the road in an hour. Everyone else, sound off with your ETAs. Can't wait to see you all. Let the summer of fun officially begin." A flurry of confirmations followed, a digital roll call of the invading army. On our way. "Sweetie. See you this afternoon," my mother wrote, adding a dozen heart emojis. "Leaving after lunch." Bringing the jumbo pack of hot dogs for the grill, Uncle Jack contributed. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The liquid was hot and bitter, a perfect match for my mood. I felt no anxiety, no panic. The feeling was closer to the quiet, focused anticipation an engineer might feel before a controlled demolition. All the preparations were complete. The charges were set. All that was left was to push the button and watch the spectacle unfold. I carried my mug to my home office and sat down at my large mahogany desk. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating my face in the dim room. I typed in a password and clicked on a discrete icon on my desktop, the logo of the Vermont security firm. A portal opened, displaying a mosaic of 4 live video feeds, each one crisp and clear in high definition. Camera 1, the long gravel driveway, seen from a high angle under the eaves of the garage. Camera 2, the front porch and main entrance. Camera 3, the back deck, overlooking the serene, sparkling lake. Camera 4, a wider angle of the side yard and the path leading down to the water. Everything was still. The only movement was the gentle sway of the tall pine trees in the morning breeze. It was a perfect, peaceful image, a portrait of tranquility, unaware of the chaos that was barreling towards it on Interstate 91. I took another sip of coffee and settled in. The show was about to begin. An hour and a half later, Camera 1 captured the first sign of movement, a gleaming white SUV, Ethan's pride and joy, turned off the main road and crunched its way up the driveway. It pulled to a stop directly in front of the garage, as if it owned the place. The driver's side door opened, and Allison emerged. She was wearing a floral sundress and oversized sunglasses, a picture of carefree vacation glamour. Ethan got out from the other side, dressed in khaki shorts and a polo shirt, already looking like the self-appointed lord of the manor. They didn't even glance at the house. They went straight to the back of the SUV and opened the hatch, revealing a mountain of luggage, coolers, and designer tote bags. I can't believe how much we packed. I heard Allison's voice, faint but clear through the camera's microphone. "It's like we're moving in for the whole summer. That is rather the point, isn't it?" I thought, a thin smile playing on my lips. The second car arrived 20 minutes later, my parents' familiar, slightly dented silver sedan. My mother got out before the car had even fully stopped, rushing to embrace Allison. My father began unloading their own bags, including a box labeled linens, which I presumed held the sacred textiles my own home was unworthy of. They gathered in the driveway, a small, laughing cluster of trespassers, their voices a cheerful murmur that the microphone picked up in snippets. The traffic was awful, but worth it. Did you remember to bring the good Chardonnay? Dear, can't wait to just sit on that deck with a drink. Next came Uncle Jack and Aunt Pam in their sprawling minivan. The side door slid open, and it was as if a clown car had exploded. Out came 2 oversized coolers, a folded-up canopy tent, 4 beach chairs, a giant inflatable flamingo, and a brand-new, still-in-the-box, gas grill. Uncle Jack slapped Ethan on the back, gesturing with pride at the grill. This baby has 6 burners. We're going to be eating like kings. The scene was one of pure, unadulterated joy, a happy family, gathering at their summer retreat to create cherished memories. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. They were actors in a play, reading their lines with gusto, completely unaware that the set was about to collapse around them. They moved with a casual, proprietary air, pointing at the house, discussing which rooms they would take, who would get the best view, where Jack should set up his new grill. They treated my home like a timeshare, a public commodity for their use and enjoyment. I watched, a silent, unseen observer from 100 miles away. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a nature documentary about a pack of animals migrating to a new territory, oblivious to the fact that the territory was already claimed. The sun glinted off the chrome of the grill. Aunt Pam laughed, throwing her head back. My mother pointed towards the front door, a gesture that clearly meant, well, shall we go in? Allison, as the self-appointed leader of the expedition, beamed, okay, everyone, let's get this stuff inside and crack open a beer. She bounced on the balls of her feet, then trotted towards the front porch, her sundress fluttering behind her. Ethan and my father followed, each grabbing a heavy suitcase. The rest of the family began to move towards the house, a slow, happy procession of the condemned. My eyes were fixed on the feed from camera 2. I saw Allison in perfect high-definition clarity as she stepped onto the porch. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small keychain. Dangling from it was the old brass key, the emergency key, the key I had given my mother in a moment of weakness, a key that had become a symbol of their entitlement. She smiled brightly at my father, who was standing just behind her, and then she turned to the door. I leaned forward, my coffee forgotten. My entire being focused on that tiny 24-inch screen. I watched her insert the key into the brand-new, high-security lock. The stage was set. The first act was over, and the curtain was about to rise on the main event. The image on my laptop screen was perfectly framed. Allison stood on the porch, bathed in the innocent June sunlight. A modern-day Goldilocks, about to discover that this particular house was no longer available. She slid the old brass key into the lock. I watched, my posture perfectly still, as she attempted to turn it. It didn't budge. The feed from camera 2 captured her expression with exquisite clarity, a flicker of surprise, followed by a slight, petulant frown. She pulled the key out, examined it as if it had personally betrayed her, and jammed it back into the lock. She tried again, wiggling it with more force this time. The only result was the faint, grating sound of metal scraping against hardened steel tumblers that would never yield to it. "What the?" she muttered, her voice a faint whisper on the microphone. Ethan, who had been standing behind her with a proprietary air, stepped forward. "Here, let me," he said, his tone laced with the casual condescension of a man who assumes all mechanical problems are caused by female incompetence. He took the key from her, his large hand dwarfing hers. He inserted it with a confident thrust and tried to turn it. Nothing. He grunted, applying more pressure. The muscles in his forearm tensed. The door remained shut, impassive and absolute. He twisted the handle, which, of course, did nothing. He rattled it, a series of violent, frustrated jerks. The solid wood door didn't even tremble. "It's stuck," he announced, as if the fault lay with the door and not the key. By now, the rest of the family had gathered at the bottom of the porch steps, their happy chatter dying down as they sensed a problem. "What's going on?" my mother asked, her voice tight with an anxiety that had nothing to do with a stuck lock and everything to do with a disruption to her plans. "The key's not working," Allison said, her voice rising in pitch. "Natalie must have given us a bad one." My father stepped onto the porch. "Let me try." "Ethan." He took the key and repeated the same useless ritual, his face growing redder with each failed attempt. The festive atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by a tense, confused silence. It was Aunt Pam who saw it first. Her gaze had wandered from the frustrating drama at the door up to the eaves of the porch. Her eyes widened. She raised a trembling finger. "Jack, look," she whispered. Everyone followed her gaze, and there it was. Tucked discreetly against the dark wood was the sleek, black dome of the new security camera. Its small dark lens was aimed directly at them, an unblinking, omniscient eye. The moment of realization was a beautiful thing to behold. It rippled through the group like a shockwave. I saw their faces shift from confusion to dawning comprehension, and then to outrage. They weren't just locked out, they were being watched. My phone, sitting on the desk beside my laptop, exploded into life. The screen lit up with my mother's name, the vibration so violent it made the ceramic of my coffee mug rattle. I watched the call ring and ring and ring until it went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, Allison's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring, too. Then my father, then Uncle Jack. I leaned back in my chair, a silent god observing the frantic prayers of mortals who had suddenly realized their deity was not a benevolent one. As the phone calls failed, the text messages began. They scrolled across my lock screen in a furious, chaotic stream, each one a small burst of digital shrapnel. "Allison, are you kidding me?" "Natalie." "Mom." "Natalie, call me this instant. This is not funny." "Allison, what the hell is this? We drove 6 hours." "Dad, turn this camera off and open the door. You are embarrassing this family." "Aunt Pam, I have never been so insulted in my entire life." "Allison, you are a psychopath. A sick, twisted psychopath." "Mom, your father is furious. I am mortified. How could you be so cruel? You are breaking my heart." The messages were a symphony of indignation, a chorus of people who had crashed their ship on the rocks of a boundary they never knew existed. They couldn't comprehend it. In their world, I was a utility, a resource. For a utility to suddenly deny them service was not just an inconvenience, it was a fundamental violation of the natural order. On the screen, I watched them huddle together on my lawn, their faces contorted with rage, their phones in their hands as they fired off their volleys of impotent anger. Ethan had separated from the group. He was pacing back and forth on the driveway, his face a thunderous mask. He looked like a bull who had charged at a red cape, only to find it was made of solid steel. He stopped pacing and furiously typed something into his phone. A moment later, a new message appeared on my screen, a private text from him. "Ethan, I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but we're done. I'm giving you 2 minutes to unlock this door, or I'm kicking it in." I read his message, the threat so predictable, so perfectly in character, the final, desperate move of a man whose privilege had been challenged. He was going to use brute force to take what he believed was his. I placed my coffee mug down on its coaster. My movements were slow, measured. I picked up my phone and unlocked it. My thumb cool against the glass, I navigated to my messages, bypassing the dozens of unread notifications, and opened the thread with Ethan. His threat glowed on the screen, a monument to his arrogance. My fingers moved calmly across the keyboard. I typed 4 words. I read them once to ensure there were no typos. There were none. The message was perfect in its simplicity, its clarity, its absolute, unshakable finality. "Try it. The police will be there in 3 minutes." I hit send. Then I placed the phone face down on the desk, cutting off the stream of incoming rage. I took a deep, cleansing breath and turned my full attention back to the live feed on my laptop, a silent spectator waiting for the final act of a play I had written, produced, and directed myself. The effect of my message on the scene was instantaneous and deeply satisfying. On the screen, I watched Ethan freeze, his phone in his hand, his face, which had been a mask of bullish rage, slackened into confusion. He looked down at his phone again. Then his eyes darted around the property, finally landing on the camera above the porch. This time, he saw it not as an insult, but as a tactical device, a witness. He saw the invisible tripwire I had laid. His threat was built on the assumption that this was a private, family matter, a space where his physical intimidation held currency. My text had transformed my front lawn into a potential crime scene. He slowly lowered his hand, the blustering anger drained out of him, replaced by a sullen, resentful impotence. He turned to the others, who were watching him expectantly, and said something I couldn't quite hear, but the effect on them was clear. A wave of disbelief and fresh outrage washed over their faces. My mother put her hand to her chest, a gesture of performative shock. My father's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. They understood. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a strategy. This was a war they were not equipped to fight. I watched them for another minute as they devolved into a disjointed, bickering mob. They gestured at the house, at the cars full of their belongings, at the useless key still dangling from Allison's hand. The festive vacation had curdled into a humiliating roadside fiasco. They were defeated. They had no moves left to make. And with that realization, I knew I was done watching. The spectacle was over. The real work was about to begin. I minimized the video feed, reducing their chaotic drama to a small icon on my screen. My attention turned to my phone. It lay face down, a dark, silent rectangle. I picked it up. The screen glowed with a backlog of their fury. I opened the Family Fun group chat. The last message was my mother's, "She'll come around. She always does." My finger moved to the top of the screen, tapping on the group's name. I scrolled down past the list of participants, my jailers, until I found the option I was looking for. It was written in a stark, clinical red, "Leave group." I pressed it without hesitation. A confirmation box appeared. "Are you sure you want to leave this group?" I pressed, "Leave." The chat window vanished from my phone, instantly erasing 3 decades of ingrained obligation. It was the first lock I had broken. Next, I opened my contacts. I started with the letter A, Allison. I tapped her name. Then the 3 small dots in the corner. Block this caller. Block. Her contact was now inert. A dead end. I moved on. Aunt Pam. Block. Dad. Block. Ethan. I paused for a fraction of a second, savoring this one. Block. Mom. My thumb hovered over her name, a ghost of a feeling, a vestige of filial duty, stirred within me. It was a weak, dying thing. I pressed the button. Block. I went through the list, methodically, dispassionately, until every single one of them was silenced. The phone in my hand was no longer a leash. It was just a tool, and now it answered only to me. But the most important task was yet to come. I turned to my laptop, closed the security portal, and opened my web browser. I navigated to the homepage of my bank, the same institution that managed the hedge fund's billions. I logged into my personal accounts, the screen displaying the healthy, robust balance I had built for myself, brick by meticulous brick. I clicked on the tab for transfers and bill pay. A list of my recurring payments appeared. It was a financial map of my servitude. First on the list, Mom and Dad. Mortgage assist, a monthly transfer of $2,000 that I had been making for the past 5 years. Ever since my father's early retirement, it ensured they could live comfortably, maintain their garden, and host parties for Allison without a single financial worry. I clicked the small edit button next to it. Then I clicked Delete Recurring Payment. A box popped up. This will cancel all future scheduled payments. Do you wish to continue? My finger pressed down on the trackpad. Click. The payment vanished from the list. Next, Allison car note. $750 a month for the gleaming white SUV currently sitting in my driveway. She'd cried to me that she and Ethan were stretched so thin, but that she absolutely needed a safe, reliable car. I had set up the payment that same day. Click, deleted. Next, Pam and Jack utilities. A smaller amount, $300 a month, that I'd started sending after Uncle Jack lost his job 2 years ago. It was supposed to be a temporary help. It had become a permanent subsidy. Click, deleted. I went down the line, a quiet, ruthless accountant, closing the books on a series of bad investments. The money for my mother's country club membership, the monthly allowance I sent Allison for essentials, every last cord of financial dependency. I severed with a clean, simple click. The total amount I had been giving away each month was staggering. I had never allowed myself to add it all up before. Seeing the number, I felt a flash of nausea, followed by a wave of cold, hard resolve. When I was finished, the recurring payments list was empty. There was only my mortgage, my condo fees, my own life. I leaned back in my chair. The silence in my apartment was absolute. No buzzing phone, no incoming demands. It was a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. My shoulders, which I hadn't realized were knotted tight, began to relax. I felt a lightness in my chest, an unfamiliar sensation of space and air. It was as if I had been carrying a massive, invisible weight on my back my entire life, and I had just shrugged it off. The weight of being the good one, the responsible one, the one who would always sacrifice, always understand, always provide, the one who would always, eventually, come around. That person was gone. I had deleted her. One blocked contact and one canceled payment at a time. I was not a good daughter. I was not a supportive sister. I was not the quiet, reliable foundation upon which they built their comfortable lives. I was Natalie, a 34-year-old woman sitting in her own apartment, drinking her own coffee, living her own life. For the very first time, I felt the terrifying, exhilarating, and absolute freedom of it, and I knew, with a certainty that resonated in my very bones, that I was never, ever going back. A week after the failed invasion, I drove back to Vermont. This time, there was no preemptive mission to fortify my defenses. I was simply a woman going to her vacation home. The 2 silver keys felt comfortable and correct in my hand. As I turned onto the gravel driveway, I saw that the tire tracks from their caravan of cars had been washed away by a recent rain, leaving the approach clean and undisturbed. The house stood exactly as I had left it, a silent, steadfast guardian of my solitude. Unlocking the door felt different now. It was not an act of access, but an act of entry into a world that was exclusively mine. The air inside was cool and still, smelling faintly of cedar and clean wood. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing along the back of the sofa, the smooth surface of the kitchen counter. There were no ghosts of their expectations here, no lingering resentment. The house was a blank slate, and for the next 2 weeks, I would be its only author. My days fell into a rhythm dictated not by a clock, but by the sun and the lake. I would wake early, when the morning mist was still clinging to the surface of the water, and make a pot of strong black coffee. I would take my mug down to the small private dock, my bare feet cold on the damp wood, and watch the world awaken. The only sounds were the call of a loon across the water and the gentle lapping of the waves. It was a silence so complete that I could feel the tension I had carried in my shoulders for years begin to dissolve. After my coffee, I would swim. I'd strip down to my swimsuit and dive into the bracingly cold water. The initial shock was a jolt to the system, a baptism that washed away everything but the immediate, physical sensation of being alive. I would swim far out into the lake, my arms pulling through the silky water, until the house was just a small shape on the shore. Out there, surrounded by the vastness of the water and the sky, I felt a profound sense of perspective. My family, their drama, their demands, it all seemed so small, so insignificant, from this distance. The afternoons were for reading. I had brought a box of books I had always meant to get to: thick novels, complex histories, books that required an investment of time and attention I had never been able to afford. I would sit on the deck, the warm sun on my skin, and lose myself for hours, surfacing only to refill my glass of iced tea. I wasn't reading to escape. I was reading to reconnect with the parts of myself I had neglected: my curiosity, my intellect, my imagination. In the evenings, I cooked for myself. It was one of the greatest luxuries. I made meals that were for my pleasure alone. Spicy Thai curries that my mother would have found too exotic. Perfectly seared scallops that Allison would have complained were too expensive. Simple, rustic pasta dishes that required nothing more than good olive oil, garlic, and fresh herbs from the small garden I'd planted by the kitchen window. I ate on the deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, and I savored every single bite. I was nourishing not just my body, but my independence. I had established a new set of rules for my world. My phone, once a conduit for constant, low-grade anxiety, was now a tool I controlled completely. I kept it on silent, tucked away in a drawer for most of the day. Once, in the evening, I would take it out and connect to the Wi-Fi. My personal email, which I had never given them, remained blessedly empty. But my old email account, the one they all had, was a different story. The first few days, there were dozens of messages. They were from new email addresses they had created, or from the accounts of distant relatives they had enlisted in their cause. The subject lines were a predictable mix of manipulative pleas and veiled threats. "We need to talk. Your mother is sick with worry. You are tearing this family apart." The first time I saw them, a faint echo of the old guilt flickered within me. It was a well-trained reflex, the product of a lifetime of conditioning, but I looked out at the calm, dark water of the lake, and the feeling subsided. I did not open a single one. I created a filter that automatically sent any email from any of them, or containing any of their names, directly to the trash. I was building a firewall, not just for my inbox, but for my soul. My new world had a strict admissions policy, and they were not on the list. One afternoon, a week into my stay, I was reading on the deck when a delivery van came down the driveway. The driver brought a large, elaborate basket of flowers to the door. There was a card attached. I knew who it was from. I thanked the driver, took the card, and left the ridiculously oversized bouquet on the porch. The card read, in my mother's elegant, looping script, "We are so sorry. Please just call us." I read the words, and I felt nothing. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't anger. It was a profound and peaceful indifference. Sorry was not a word that could stitch back the years of being overlooked, of being used, of being treated as an extension of their own needs. It could not repay the hours I had spent listening to their trivial dramas while my own life went unheard. It could not refund the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had poured into their lives, a silent tax on my success. I dropped the card into the kitchen trash can. The years of one-sided support, both emotional and financial, were not a debt to be repaid or a grievance to be negotiated. They were simply a chapter of my life that was now, finally, over. I had closed the book. That night, as a thunderstorm rolled in across the lake, I sat in the dark house, watching the lightning illuminate the churning water. The wind howled, and the rain beat against the glass. But inside, I was perfectly safe, perfectly calm. I had built this sanctuary, and I had defended it. The storm was outside, and for the first time in my life, inside, there was only peace. Returning to Boston was like breathing a different kind of air. The 2 weeks at the lake had been a quiet, solitary reset. Walking back into the gleaming, high-pressure environment of the hedge fund felt less like an obligation and more like a return to a place where I had always, unequivocally, belonged. The difference was that I was no longer bifurcated. The vast reservoir of mental and emotional energy that had been perpetually reserved for managing my family, for anticipating their needs, absorbing their dramas, and navigating their expectations was now entirely my own. The results were immediate and startling. My work had always been precise and meticulous, But now it possessed a new dimension of boldness and clarity, a complex, multinational acquisition that had been causing problems for the senior partners landed on my desk before. I would have seen it as a mountain of risk to be cautiously navigated. Now, I saw it as a puzzle, and I attacked it with a ferocious, joyful focus. I worked with an efficiency that surprised even myself, untangling convoluted legal frameworks, identifying opportunities where others saw only liabilities. I was no longer just analyzing the game. I was seeing 3 moves ahead. In a key meeting, I presented a strategy that was so counterintuitive, yet so flawlessly logical that the entire boardroom fell silent. When I finished, my managing director, a man not known for effusive praise, looked at me with a newfound respect. "Hail," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. That was brilliant. The next day, he officially made me the lead analyst on the project, a role of immense responsibility and visibility. I felt no fear, only a quiet, thrumming certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was thriving not in spite of what I had done, but because of it. I had cleared out all the dead weight in my life, and now my ascent was effortless. It was on this project that I began to truly see Mark. Mark Jennings was a senior strategist in the acquisitions department. He'd been at the fund for years, a quiet, respected presence in the background of my professional life. We had exchanged polite nods in the hallway, sat in the same meetings, but we had never truly connected. With the fog of my family obligations lifted, I was suddenly noticing things I'd been blind to before. I noticed the intelligence in his calm, steady eyes. I noticed the dry wit in his contributions to meetings, insights that often cut through hours of circular debate. And I noticed that he was watching me too. Our collaboration started with late nights in the conference room, poring over spreadsheets and legal documents. The work was intense, but our interactions were easy. He listened when I spoke, truly listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk. He challenged my assumptions with respect and yielded when my logic was sound. He never crowded me, never pried. He operated on the assumption that I was a competent, self-contained adult, and the novelty of that was exhilarating. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, he turned to me as we were packing up our briefcases. "I know it's late," he said, his voice even, "but I could really use a drink that doesn't taste like stale office coffee. Would you be interested?" The old Natalie would have hesitated, would have run a dozen panicked calculations about expectations and obligations. The new Natalie simply smiled. "I'd like that." We went to a quiet bar near the office, and the conversation flowed from work to books, to travel, to the strange and intricate ecosystem of life in a high-stakes firm. He was curious and engaging, but there was a stillness to him, a respect for space that I found incredibly comforting. When I mentioned I needed to get home to get an early start, he simply said, "Of course, thank you for the drink." "Natalie." There was no pressure, no pleading, no hint of disappointment, just acceptance. It was a language of mutual respect I was only just beginning to learn. One drink led to another, and then to dinners. We dated for a couple of months, building something slow and steady and real. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give. He seemed to have an innate understanding of my need for solitude and independence, not as a flaw to be fixed, but as an integral part of who I was. One rainy Saturday, we were in my condo. I had cooked dinner, and we were sitting on the sofa, listening to the rain streak against the windows. The sense of peace was so complete, so different from the fraught, performative quiet of my family gatherings, that I felt a sudden urge to tell him everything. I wanted him to know the full story of the person he was getting to know, including the scorched earth I had left behind. "There's something you should probably know about me," I began, my voice a little unsteady, "about my family." He turned to face me, his expression open and patient. He didn't say anything. He just waited. He gave me the space to speak. And so I told him. I told him about Allison, the Sun Queen, and my role as the forgotten moon. I told him about the years of being overlooked, of my achievements being minimized, of my life serving as a footnote in their grand narrative. I told him about the endless financial support, the spare key, and the birthday party where I saw the decision in their eyes. I told him about the group chat, the invasion, the cameras, and the new locks. I told him about the final, liberating act of blocking their numbers and canceling their subsidies. As I spoke, I watched his face for any sign of judgment, of shock, of pity. I saw none. He just listened, his gaze unwavering, his hand resting calmly on his knee. I finished the story with the final text message I had sent to Ethan. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of the rain. I know it probably sounds cold, I said, the old fear of being judged creeping in. To do that to your own family. He was quiet for a long moment, not in an uncomfortable way, but in a thoughtful one. He seemed to be considering the full weight of my story. Then he looked me directly in the eye, his expression one of absolute, unambiguous clarity. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. He reached out and gently took my hand. "Natalie, family isn't a license to be abusive. It's not a blank check to disrespect, use, and control someone. What you did wasn't cold. It was self-preservation. You didn't break your family. You just stopped letting them break you." The simple, powerful validation in his words was like a key turning the final lock inside me. To be seen so completely, to be understood without reservation, was a gift I had never received from the people who were supposed to love me most. The last, lingering specter of guilt that had haunted the corners of my mind vanished in that moment, burned away by the warmth of his acceptance. I had spent a lifetime earning my own money, building my own home, and forging my own path, but it was here, in the quiet of my living room, holding the hand of a good man, that I finally, truly, felt like I had come home. The silence lasted for 3 months. It was a deep, restorative quiet that settled over my life, allowing new things to grow in the space where the noise used to be. My relationship with Mark deepened, built on a foundation of mutual respect and easy companionship. The acquisition project at work was a resounding success, earning me a promotion to vice president, the youngest in the firm's history. My life was moving forward with a momentum that felt powerful and clean. I had not heard a single word from my family. The firewalls I had erected, both digital and emotional, were holding strong. The summons, when it came, was not a direct assault. It was a carefully planned flanking maneuver. An email appeared in my inbox from a cousin I had not blocked, a younger woman who had always remained on the periphery of the family's core drama. The subject line was simple: a family meeting. The message was cloying in its appeal to a unity that had never existed. My mother was distraught. She wrote, "My father was losing sleep. Allison was a wreck. It was time," she pleaded, "for all of us to come together, to heal, and to find a way forward as a family." They wanted to meet at my parents' house the following Sunday. It wasn't a request. It was a royal decree disguised as a white flag. I read the email to Mark that evening. He listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. "It's an ambush," he said simply when I had finished. "I know," I replied. "You don't have to go. I know that, too," I said, looking out my window at the Boston skyline. "But I think I need to. Not for them, for me. I built the walls, I locked the doors, but I never gave them the closing statement. I think I need to do that before I can finally tear the whole courthouse down." He nodded, understanding completely. "Then I'll drive you," he said. "I'll wait in the car down the street, just in case." And so, on a crisp autumn Sunday, I found myself walking up the familiar flagstone path to my parents' front door. The house looked exactly the same, but I felt like a stranger visiting a foreign country. I pressed the doorbell, and the door was opened by my father. His face, which I had expected to be etched with either anger or remorse, was a mask of strained, artificial pleasantry. "Natalie," he said, as if I were a neighbor dropping by with a pie. "Come in, come in." They were all there, arranged in the living room like a jury. My mother, Allison, and Ethan sat on the sofa. My father took his usual armchair. There was an empty chair placed opposite them, clearly intended for me, the prodigal daughter, summoned to the tribunal. I didn't take the seat. I remained standing by the fireplace, creating my own space, refusing to be placed in the box they had prepared for me. My father cleared his throat, assuming the role of patriarch and chief justice. Thank you for coming. Natalie, this has been a difficult few months for all of us. Your mother has been beside herself. We've all been very hurt, but we're a family, and families forgive. We're ready to put this unfortunate business with the lake house behind us. I said nothing. I just watched them, my expression unreadable. My mother spoke next, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. I just don't understand how we got here, she said, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. All Allison wanted was to bring the family together, for us all to have a beautiful summer, making memories. Was that so wrong? Allison, on cue, chimed in, her voice dripping with the self-pity she had perfected into an art form. I never meant to hurt you. Nat, I thought you'd be happy to share. I thought you cared about this family, but you chose a house over us. Ethan put a protective arm around her, glaring at me as if I were a monster who had wounded his delicate flower. I let their words hang in the air, a tapestry of manipulation and delusion. I noted the complete and total absence of the one word that might have mattered: sorry. They weren't here to apologize. They were here to renegotiate the terms of my surrender. We need to be united, my father said, his voice taking on a tone of magnanimous authority. This division, this silence, it's not healthy. So, we've talked, and we have a solution, a compromise. He leaned forward, the benevolent king about to dispense his wisdom. We think the lake house should be a shared family property. We've even drafted a schedule. Allison and Ethan can have it for July. Your mother and I will take August, and we'll leave June and the off-season weekends for you. It's a fair plan. It allows everyone to enjoy it. It brings the family back together. He smiled, a satisfied, confident expression, as if he had just solved world peace. In his mind, he had been incredibly generous. He was offering me back a piece of what was already mine. The silence that followed stretched for a long moment. I let my gaze travel from my father's expectant face to my mother's hopeful one, to Allison's smug, triumphant smirk. They truly believed this would work. They believed that after 3 months, the old Natalie would have re-emerged, worn down by guilt, and ready to capitulate. They still had no idea who I was. When I finally spoke, my voice was not loud, but it filled the room with a calm, unshakable finality. No, I said. The smiles vanished. What do you mean? No, my father stammered. This is a perfectly reasonable. There is nothing to negotiate, I said, cutting him off, not with anger, but with the simple, cold weight of fact. I looked directly at all of them, the authors of my isolation. I let them see the person they had created, the woman who had learned to survive in the barren landscape of their indifference. For years, I bought my place in this family with my silence, with my money, and with my compliance. I funded your lives while mine went unacknowledged. I listened to your problems while mine went unheard. I built a sanctuary for myself, and you saw it as just another one of my assets that you were entitled to. I paused, letting the truth of my words settle in the suffocating air of the room. You don't want unity. You want access. You don't want reconciliation. You want your subsidies back. You are not sorry for what you did. You are only sorry for what you lost. I took a small breath. It was time for the final word, the closing argument. So, let me be perfectly clear, I said, my voice as steady as granite. I do not share what I had to earn with loneliness and hurt. And with that, I turned. I did not wait for a response. I did not need to hear their sputtering rage or their shocked disbelief. Their opinions were no longer relevant to my life. I walked out of the living room, through the hallway, and out the front door into the crisp, clean autumn air. I did not look back. I closed the door softly behind me and walked away from the house I grew up in, finally and completely free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. So drop a comment down below and let's connect. Share your own thoughts on the story. And if you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. It would also mean the world if you hit that hype button to help this story reach more people.